Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Els Van Doren. Els Van Doren, a 38-year-old woman from Belgium, was married to a jewelry craftsman named Jan de Wilde. They had two children, Vincent de Wilde and Carol de Wilde. Although she worked in the family's jewelry store, Van Doren's real passion was skydiving. She started skydiving with her husband in 1994, and her enthusiasm for the sport grew over time. With 2,300 jumps to her name, she became an experienced skydiver. Every weekend and on holidays, she dedicated her time to skydiving. In 1998, Van Doren started formation jumping and joined an all-female skydiving team, the Divas, in 2001. They even competed in the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. Unfortunately, Van Doren had to leave the group in 2004 because of health problems related to a hernia. After she got better, she decided to skydive for fun instead of competition. She became a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club, and by 2006, she had completed over 2,300 successful jumps. It was in this club where she became close friends with another skydiver, a 26-year-old school teacher named Van Doren Clerans. Because they both had the same first name, Van Doren later came up with the nickname Babs for her younger friend to avoid any confusion. Another member of the club, a man named Marcel Summers, was also friends with both women. The three of them became good friends and started diving together during their skydiving trips. Over time, Van Doren grew closer to Marcel, despite being married. Their friendship turned into a romantic involvement. Van Doren family was accustomed to her spending weekends at the skydiving club, which unknowingly helped her conceal her relationship with Marcel from her husband. They would often visit Marcel's apartment, spending their weekends together without any worry. Van Doren was unaware that she and Clerans not only shared a first name, but also the same man. Without either woman knowing, Marcel had been secretly involved with both of them intimately to juggle both relationships. He created a schedule, assigning specific days for each woman. Fridays were for Clerans, while Saturdays were for Van Doren. This setup worked well for Marcel for a while, but it wouldn't last long as an unexpected turn of events was on the horizon. On a particular weekend, on the evening of Friday, November 10, 2006, Clerans went to Marcel's place as they usually did every week. Little did she know, Els Van Doren had decided to surprise Marcel by showing up unexpectedly that same night. Clerans and Marcel were having dinner together when they returned to Marcel's apartment and found Van Doren waiting outside his door. The details of their subsequent conversation are unknown, but what is certain is that on that night, Clerans did not share Marcel's bed. Instead, she ended up sleeping in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Van Doren and Marcel went to the bedroom. There, in the living room, Clerans noticed Van Doren's parachute and other skydiving gear in close proximity. Feeling wounded and betrayed after being deceived and replaced by her friend, Clerans resorted to an unthinkable action, which led to a tragic outcome. Later on November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Van Doren, Clerans, and Marcel, embarked on a flight over Flanders. The plan involved Van Doren, Clerans, Marcel, and another skydiver named Tom executing a four-person formation jump at 13,000 feet. During this formation, they would interlock hands before releasing and deploying their parachutes as they prepared for the jump. Marcel and Tom leaped from the plane as intended. However, it seemed that Clerans, perhaps due to a delay or intentionally, jumped slightly later than the others. During the freefall, Clerans was not able to catch up with the group, and at 9,000 feet, Marcel, Van Doren, and Tom broke the formation, preparing to safely open their parachutes. At this point, it became clear that a serious problem had arisen. As Van Doren tried to activate her parachute by pulling the cords, it failed to open. Striving to stay calm, she recalled the emergency procedures from her training, and having dealt with a malfunctioning parachute before, She had successfully deployed the reserve parachute on that previous occasion. However, in this situation, plummeting through the air at around 200 kilometers per hour, she had only 20 seconds or less to perform a life-saving maneuver for a successful landing. Despite her efforts, pulling the reserve cord proved futile, as the parachute remained unresponsive. With her desperation escalating, she persisted in tugging at both the main parachute and reserve cords, yet no response ensued. Marcel, who was 800 meters above, observed Van Doren, who was a mere 500 meters from the ground, and sensed that something was wrong as her parachute had still not been deployed. But he could do nothing but witness the unfolding horror. In the second desperate attempt, Van Doren tried to undo the cords of the parachute, hoping to activate it, but her fate had already been sealed. At the same time, in the town of Upap-Beek, as these events were unfolding, a woman was outside doing laundry in her garden. A loud noise alerted her to what had happened, and looking up, she saw a person descending from the sky with a parachute towards her garden. This spectacle wasn't unfamiliar, given that her residence was merely a few kilometers from the skydiving club and its landing field. While turning to resume her laundry task, the woman spotted a white fabric entangled on top of her shrubs. Drawing closer, she saw a person lying amidst the bushes. Swiftly, she called her husband, who was also in the garden attending to maintenance duties, and they promptly contacted emergency services. That person was Els Van Doren. They assumed she was one of the skydivers, but unfortunately, she showed no signs of life. Meanwhile, Marcel found a safe landing spot and ran through the streets, desperately calling out for Van Doren and trying to locate her. Marcel spotted an ambulance and followed it to the nearby site where Van Doren had landed. He rushed towards her, but had to be restrained to allow the emergency crew to approach. Upon the arrival of emergency services, resuscitation efforts were initiated but proved futile. Els Van Doren had succumbed. Marcel vehemently insisted on preserving Van Doren's parachute untouched, asserting the abnormality of both the main and reserve parachutes failing to open. He then contacted her husband, Jan, and delivered the devastating news. Jan hurried to his wife's side, while Tom and Clerans returned to the parachute club to relay the tragic news of Van Doren's demise to the other members. The club members were deeply affected by the news. Clerans, feeling overwhelmed, knelt down and let out a sorrowful cry. Else's husband, Jan, came to the club to collect her things and found Clerans there. She offered to get the items, and he noticed her standing still with a strange smile. Clerans then went towards the changing rooms with Jan following behind. But when they reached there, she suddenly closed the door, locking Jan outside. Jan later mentioned that Clerans took quite a while before finally coming out with Van Doren's belongings. Meanwhile, at the accident site, the police had gathered Van Doren's parachute and helmet, the latter equipped with a video camera capturing her ill-fated jump. An autopsy conducted to ascertain her state revealed no traces of alcohol or drugs that might have impaired her. Her death was classified as either a murder or a suicide, attributed to multiple fractures and internal bleeding, resulting from the impact of the fall. Suspicions arose within Van Doren's family, pointing toward the possibility of her being murdered by someone within her skydiving club, an individual knowledgeable about how parachutes work. Subsequently, the club members were advised not to attend her funeral, a request that some members, including Van Doren Clerans, ignored. Jan, in particular, felt deeply hurt, learning that fellow club members were aware of the affair, some of whom he considered friends from his own club membership. To make things worse, Van Doren had falsely told her club friends that she was separated from her husband. Her funeral took place just a day before her daughter Carol's 15th birthday. During this sad occasion, Carol talked to her mother with a heartfelt statement. She mentioned how the family had asked her mother many times to stop skydiving and expressed how much they wanted her to stay with them. After the concerns about Van Doren's reserve parachute failing, the police started investigating shortly after the funeral. They brought in a parachuting specialist who knew a lot about parachutes, to examine Van Doren's parachute and look for any problems. The expert quickly noticed a major issue. A crucial part of her parachute, the pilot chute, was missing. This small extra parachute is important for deploying either the main or reserve parachute. Its intentional removal seemed to be on purpose. Also, there were clear signs of tampering, such as the cut drawing to the pilot chute that activates the main parachute, and one of the straps connected to the emergency parachute. After reviewing the latest body camera footage from Van Doren's failed jump, investigators noticed a unidentified red fabric in front of her face that did not belong to her skydiving equipment. They are still trying to determine where this fabric came from and have asked the residents to search their gardens and surrounding areas for the red item. If found, they stressed the importance of handling it carefully, as it could contain DNA from the person who tampered with Van Doren's parachute. Sadly, no one has been able to find this key piece of evidence. On the Monday following Els Van Doren's tragic demise, a remarkable discovery came to light as the pilot chute was mysteriously found by Clerans. She claimed that on her way back from Marcel's apartment, she spotted the chute hanging from a tree during her journey between Oplab and Gank. Instead of contacting the police directly, Clerans decided to inform Marcel of her find. Upon learning of the discovery, Marcel called the police, who promptly went to the site of the tree. Upon their arrival, the police encountered a nervous, troubled, and visibly emotional Clerans. However, their suspicions were aroused regarding Clerans' miraculous discovery of the pilot chute. She claimed that it was purely coincidental, attributing it to her decision to take a different route home that day compared to her usual journey, being stuck behind a slow-moving tractor that led her to glance upward, where she spotted the chute dangling around 20 meters above. The police, however, remained skeptical, as the fact that the pilot chute was missing was known only to the investigators at that point. At this point, the primary suspects implicated in the presumed murder of Van Doren were her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Clerans. Police conducted searches at Marcel's residence and later cleared him as a suspect. Van Doren's husband, Jan, was also later cleared as a suspect by the authorities. The investigative efforts extended to Clerans' home, where the police confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and a diary documenting her emotions, as per her psychiatrist's recommendation. Clerans was later called in for questioning at the police station in an attempt to gather more information about her relationships with Marcel Van Doren and the circumstances surrounding Van Doren's death. Throughout the interrogation, Clerans firmly denied any involvement in tampering with Van Doren's parachute, and instead tried to shift the blame either onto Marcel, suggesting he had kept Van Doren's equipment during her weekend visits, or onto her husband Jan, with whom she allegedly stored her own equipment during the weekdays. After initial questioning, Clerans was released and went home. However, she failed to appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20th, 2006. It was later discovered that she had tried to take her own life that morning by overdosing on sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother, Clerans, found her unresponsive and rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Clerans wrote to her loved ones about her struggles with grief after losing her close friend and the immense stress of being a murder suspect. After her recovery, she spent 15 days in a psychiatric facility where she was closely monitored. She had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. This was not Clerans' first attempt to harm herself. Marcel, who had distanced himself from her, believed her actions were a ploy to get attention and not a genuine attempt to end her life. Marcel thought she had deliberately taken the pills just before her mother was due to return, suggesting that her main aim was to shift the focus away from her possible involvement in Van Doren's death. Marcel assumed the police were closing in on her and catching her in her own lies. After receiving psychiatric care, Clerans, was arrested on January 11, 2007, on suspicion of murdering Els Van Doren. During her court appearance on January 19, 2007, the judge decided to keep her in custody while the investigation continued. Although asked to take a polygraph test, Clerans refused, and the test was never administered. Further investigation into Els Van Doren's skydiving equipment revealed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cords using scissors, likely with their right hand. By March 2007, Clerans had spent 3 months in prison, undergoing intense questioning without confessing. However, she did admit to sending an anonymous letter to Van Doren, criticizing her for neglecting her family due to her frequent skydiving. Van Doren's partner, Jan, had found the letter, but dismissed it as a criticism of Van Doren's absence from her family. It later became clear that Clerans intended the letter as a warning to Van Doren to end her involvement with Marcel. Additionally, Clerans confessed to making anonymous calls to Marcel, timing them when she knew he was with Van Doren, in an attempt to intimidate them. Upon examining Clerans' automatic activation device, investigators found that she had jumped later than the rest of the team and opened her parachute earlier. They speculated that this gave her a better view of the events unfolding from above. In September 2008, Claude's lawyer managed to get her released on bail, and despite the ongoing investigation, she went back to working at a school. The trial for murder started on September 24, 2010, with the prosecution being very confident that they had enough evidence to convict Clerans of murder. The reason for the murder, according to the prosecution, was that Clerans was jealous because she found out her lover, Marcel, was in a relationship with her close friend, Van Doren. Earlier, Clerans had told investigators that she knew she came second to Van Doren in Marcel's eyes. She admitted that Marcel clearly preferred Van Doren over her. The prosecution argued that this led to a strong motive for the alleged murder, as Clerans desperately wanted to get rid of her romantic rival, Van Doren. Clerans' defense attorney argued that the prosecution's case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and unproven accusations. During her testimony, Clerans claimed she had no long-term plans with Marcel and only got intimately involved with him because of her low self-esteem. At one point, she even tried to shift the blame to Carol Van Doren's daughter, suggesting that she might have wanted revenge against her mother for being away most weekends. Despite her attempts to sway the jury and deflect blame, they ultimately found her guilty of murdering her friend, Els Van Doren, on October 20, 2010, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. During her trial, Clerans consistently maintained her claim of innocence. To prevent her from harming herself again, she was closely monitored. Later, she filed an appeal, arguing that the police had questioned her without her lawyer present in May 2011. However, her appeal was denied. Nevertheless, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Clerans was granted conditional release in June 2022, following a third appeal, and is now a free woman. We feel deeply sorry for what happened to Els Van Doren and her family, who had to endure so much after the truth was revealed. Our heartfelt condolences go to her loved ones who are grieving the loss of her life.
This is a story of survival that is hard to put into words. The bravery of 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett is beyond measure, and her actions in critical circumstances are remarkable. It's a rare case where the victim aided in apprehending her attacker. Despite losing her ability to speak due to a horrific injury, Jennifer survived, retaining every detail. Over 19 years, she relentlessly continued to pursue her own case, and in the end, she got her way. Yes. No. Jennifer Schuett, an 8-year-old schoolgirl, had recently finished school. She lived with her single mother, Elaine, who did everything possible to ensure her daughter's happiness and well-being. Elaine worked multiple jobs to support the family and provide Jennifer with a joyful childhood. Surrounded by such love and care, Jennifer blossomed into a lively and cheerful child, embracing learning with enthusiasm and displaying a keen intellect and curiosity. At such a young age, children are often afraid of the dark, and Jennifer was no exception. She had a fear of the dark and frequently slept alongside her mother in the same room.
As far as I can remember, back in my childhood, I just didn't like the dark or sleeping alone. So I found comfort in going to bed with my mom. We would all bed we had with each other.
That night, on August 9th, 2009, the mother and daughter slept in the same room. Jennifer was tossing and turning, kicking her mom in sleep, making it difficult for her to fall asleep. Unusually, at 2:30 a.m., Elaine woke up and asked Jennifer to go back to her own room for the rest of the night because she needed to get up early for work. Understandingly, Jennifer responded to her mother saying, "Just because I love you, Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight," and went to her room. Elaine would later regret this decision for a long time, but at that moment, she couldn't know what would happen next. The following morning, Elaine discovered that Jennifer was missing when she went to wake her up. She noticed that the window facing the parking lot was wide open. Elaine promptly called 911. Upon the police's arrival, she recounted that she hadn't heard any noise or screams after Jennifer went to her room. It is worth mentioning that their apartment was on the first floor, and the windows in Jennifer's room overlooked the parking lot, leading Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment was not the ideal living situation for her and her young daughter, but it was the best they could afford at the time. Nevertheless, Elaine's parents decided to help her and their granddaughter with a new place to live. They purchased a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother were supposed to move there in a few months, and they had been there the day before Jennifer went missing. They were working in the garden, where Jennifer was bitten by mosquitoes, which prevented her from sleeping peacefully that night. After her daughter's disappearance, Elaine was devastated. She said that Jennifer was all she had and pleaded for her return. The police worked tirelessly to locate her. Luckily, Elaine didn't have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in a field and accidentally stumbled upon something. To their horror, they realized it was the body of a young girl. Upon arriving at the scene, the police found the body of 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of the field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was grave, but she was still breathing. Jennifer's condition was grave. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear. The main life-threatening injury for Jennifer was a wide wound on her throat, which caused her to lose a lot of blood and made her extremely pale and weak. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors fought to save her life. When I first saw Jennifer in the emergency room, she was a fairly small 8-year-old, very pale, covered with ant bites and scratches on her back. She couldn't make any sounds because of the injury that she had to her neck. Fortunately, after the operation, Jennifer's condition stabilized and the bleeding stopped. We completed her surgery. Her airway is stable. She's not bleeding. So we're very hopeful about her survival. When she regained consciousness after the surgery, her behavior underwent a sudden change. It turned out that she was afraid of all men.
I was kind of a hard patient to deal with because I had a lot of nail doctors and I was scared of males.
Additionally, the Dickinson Police Department deployed a whole team to guard her hospital room. Throughout this time, Jennifer was in a constant state of panic. She even hit a doctor in the stomach when he tried to approach her. Elaine tried to reassure her daughter, explaining that all these people were there to care for her and help her. However, Jennifer didn't trust anyone. Her behavior became more understandable when she finally revealed what had happened to her that night. We knew that we had a survivor that couldn't speak. The challenges were to extract information from her. Now we're talking about an 8-year-old. It was difficult. Jennifer could not directly inform the investigator of anything. To obtain any information, the detectives gave her a notebook and several pens, asking her to answer questions in writing. Due to her fear of men, Jennifer wrote notes to her mother, who then passed them to the officer. Jennifer's responses were surprisingly precise, detailing the events accurately. Despite being only 8 years old, she displayed remarkable intelligence for her age. She started by going into her room, turning on the light, and picking up a book to read, hoping it would help her sleep, which it did. Jennifer fell asleep. The next thing she knew, a stranger was carrying her out of the house.
He was running with me, hearing me down the sidewalk, and I immediately tried to scream that he covered my nose and mouth.
Afterward, he placed Jennifer in the car, claiming to be an undercover police officer. She later confessed that she immediately felt that something was wrong. Looking around, she saw her mother's car in the parking lot, so she was confused about where they were going and why. On the one hand, she knew that the police were good guys, but on the other hand, her mother had taught her not to trust strangers.
As a child, I wanted to believe him, but the part of me that had just learned about strangers in school, the part of me that was scared of the dark, knew that there was something really wrong here.
As they passed her grandparents' house, Jennifer told the stranger that he could drop her off at their house, to which he replied, "I can't because they're not home." And then she realized he was lying because their car was in the driveway. Later, the man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her home. He then said to watch the moon carefully. When it changed color, her mother would come for her.
I remember anxiously waiting for the headlights, but they never came. I think that at that point he was trying to psych himself up for what he really intended to do.
5 minutes passed, and the stranger said, "Well, your mom's not coming, so we need to go further." They drove a few more blocks to a dead-end street where the strangers stopped the car. Jennifer tried once again to make sure he was a real policeman.
I was in an interrogating him. I was wanting him to print to me that he was a police officer. I wanted to know, where's your gun, where's your badge? He told me once back that his gun was in the back seat.
Jennifer turned around to search for it, and at that moment, the suspicious policeman took off her underwear. Jennifer is unsure of how long she was in the stranger's grip because she blacked out. She first regained consciousness when he was dragging her through the field by her ankles. Despite the excruciating pain from twigs and stones digging into her back, Jennifer pretended to be dead and stayed silent. He let go of her feet and left her in the field. Jennifer only heard him walking away. Then she heard his car door slam and him drive away.
I realized I couldn't scream, and I couldn't figure out why. I had just enough strength to throw my right hand on top of my neck, and that's when I felt this gaping wound. And I looked at my hand, and I was full of glad.
Since the exact time of Jennifer's disappearance is unknown, it is believed that she lay in the field for 12 to 14 hours. When the sun set, she saw the lights of passing cars. Nearby, she heard children's voices, and a dog approached her several times, as if trying to get the attention of its owner. But he never came. Throughout, she was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious.
Anytime I would come to, I would be in disbelief that I hadn't died yet.
Jennifer said she wasn't afraid and had even accepted that she might not survive. But suddenly she heard children's voices nearby, and at that moment, something hit her leg. The next time Jennifer regained consciousness, she heard a police officer repeating,
"You've been found, you're gonna be okay, just please stay with me, please stay with me." And I remember being put into the life flight helicopter.
This story was very challenging for young Jennifer, as she couldn't speak and had to write everything down on paper. Moreover, her fear of men complicated the situation, so her mother asked all the questions, and Jennifer's answers were relayed to the officers who were behind the door. Incredibly, 8-year-old Jennifer even managed to get the stranger's name from him.
I just remembering his name, and so I wrote, he said his name was Dennis. I remember then that he looked griefy and like he may have had a scar or something on his face.
4 days after her disappearance, the police requested the services of forensic artist Lois Gibson, who communicated with Jennifer solely through gestures and notes. Despite these challenges, they managed to create an incredibly detailed composite sketch. It was shown to the public in hopes that someone would identify the man. Meanwhile, the police continued to comb through the crime scene and found Jennifer's clothing about half a mile away, along with a man's shirt and underwear. Although there was hope that DNA on the clothing would lead to the perpetrator, no matches were found. Jennifer's recovery was gradual. She showed remarkable resilience despite still being a child. There was a moment when she got upset over a chocolate bar she couldn't eat, screamed in frustration, and a faint sound escaped her mouth. Doctors were shocked because her vocal cords were almost severed and they never expected them to heal, but somehow they began to mend.
I like to say how to set up then.
Soon after, Jennifer was discharged from the hospital. She not only returned home, but also went back to school. After completing her schooling and college education, Jennifer decided to pursue a career as a children's librarian. However, she never forgot what happened that night. Each day felt like a hunt for the criminal.
It could be anyone. This could be our neighbor. This could be someone at the post office, someone at the grocery store. If he watching enough, is he going to come back and finish me off?
Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan, and for the first time in many years, she trusted a man and they fell in love. However, at the same time, the trail of her attacker grew colder. The chances of him being found were slim, and the case showed no progress despite being passed from one investigator to another. 18 years after that dreadful night, Jennifer received a phone call.
I got a phone call that Detective Tim Cromie would be taking over my case and he wanted to meet with me.
Tim Cromie promised to do everything possible to catch the criminal, and Jennifer believed him.
And I told her, I said, Jennifer, I will do whatever I can do in my power till the end of my career to get you the answers that you...
Tim and Richard discovered the significant amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing, and immediately after she was found, with Jennifer's underwear being particularly crucial, as well as the perpetrator's shirt and underwear. They sent a DNA sample found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in 19 years, they understood that the case's age meant it would not be a priority in the lab.
Often working cold cases, time is your enemy. People forget, people move away, people die. This was one of the benefits of time in our case, was the advances of technology in the DNA field.
Despite a whole year passing, their work was rewarded. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford.
Who is that?
The same man Jennifer had written down many years ago. It turned out that the 8-year-old girl had been incredibly accurate in her descriptions.
Jennifer was 8 years old, on pain medication, couldn't speak, and hand wrote down, he said his name was Dennis. At that point, it was monumental that this girl was so accurate. Of course, later we found out how accurate she was on everything.
Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas, and his DNA was logged into the national database following an assault on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. On February 4, 2000, Dennis was conditionally released. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for driving under the influence less than half a mile from his home. He remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Tim Cromie and Richard Renison investigated the link between the suspect from North Little Rock, Arkansas, and the small town of Dickinson, Texas. It turned out that the man had been arrested in Dickinson in 1987, 3 years before Jennifer's attack. At that time, he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer and Elaine's apartment. To confirm his identity as the kidnapper, detectives requested a 19-year-old photo from his driver's license. When they saw the picture, they were stunned. He looked like a copy of the composite sketch created with the help of 8-year-old Jennifer.
You're a cancer for sure.
Yes.
You're out because you got in contact with her.
Yes.
Told about it.
No.
I didn't tell her. Obviously, it's special you are, but I think you would. If you will see her out to you need to and pray her. I really did.
I said to because you are free to want to so you are
Oh, good. You're very peppered. Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, yeah, don't let you go for it. I have great there. Oh, hurry your cards. Yeah. Bye. Oh, idea. You want me back 2 days while you're out here? Yeah, and yours to not.
Dennis Earl Bradford was arrested on October 19, 2009. He insisted he didn't know Jennifer, couldn't recall why he had stopped near her apartment, and couldn't comprehend why he had treated her so cruelly. Dennis also revealed an interesting detail that investigators didn't know. After the attack, he was overwhelmed with guilt and he attempted suicide with a shotgun. Bradford wanted to pull the trigger but changed his mind. Afterward, he was admitted to the psychiatric ward, which happened to be the same hospital that Jennifer was still in. Even at that time, he was so close to her. Immediately after the interrogation, detectives informed Jennifer that the criminal they had been searching for 19 years was arrested. Though he never met her face-to-face, Reese's mother was good friends with Tiffany's mother. Reese even called Kathy shortly after Tiffany's death and shared condolences for her untimely death. But once again, Reese would elude justice as police were unable to gather any clues to link him with Tiffany's murder, and the case went unsolved for quite some time. In 2015, investigators finally got a breakthrough in Tiffany Johnson's case. By then, DNA technology had advanced massively. A DNA swab that was taken from the state medical examiner's office during the autopsy of Tiffany was sent to the lab for DNA testing. The DNA profile got a hit in the CODIS database and implicated William Reese in the crime. In September of 2015, William Reese was charged in Oklahoma City with the 1997 kidnapping and murder of Tiffany Johnston. But just before his trial was set to begin, in an unexpected twist, he started confessing to other crimes in an attempt to cut a deal with the prosecution.
He eluded the police. They've lived for 90 years. Riley's had criminal history to its guilty. I don't know, Tim. But shades of the truth for sure.
Already suspecting him in the murder of Laura Smither and the disappearances of Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox, detectives put a bunch of photos of the 3 victims before him. He immediately accepted responsibility, but continued to deny any sexual motive behind the crimes.
Lloyd is
Well, though really expecting to meet them baked built. I was yeah, Zach. You know, I live in a while with any usually people when they're all on money. He also agreed to show investigators to the site where it claimed the remains of Kelly and Jessica were buried, on the condition that they would not seek the death penalty. In April of 2016, Reese led the investigators to a site in Houston Pasture where human remains were found after several days of digging. The remains were later confirmed by the Harris County Medical Examiner's offices as belonging to Jessica Kame. From there, the search moved through a burial site in Brazoria County where they found another set of human remains. Through dental records, the remains were positively identified as Kelly Cox. The trial for Tiffany Johnston's murder began in May of 2021 in the Oklahoma County District Court. On May 28, 2021, he was found guilty by the jury. On August 19, 2021, the judge sentenced him to death for Tiffany's abduction and murder. Following his conviction for murder in Oklahoma, Reese was extradited to stand trial in Texas in early March 2022 for the murders of Laura Smither, Kelly Cox, and Jessica Kame. He pleaded guilty to all three murders and was sentenced to life imprisonment in June 2022.
Here's an old saying in the law: justice delayed is justice denied. Justice will not be delayed any longer in this case. I sit with you to death.
Four families waited for decades to get answers regarding the fate of their loved ones, while the person responsible for these crimes selfishly kept these secrets to himself. It's saddening to see that he would only give these poor families the answers they so desperately needed to suit his own personal needs. We can only hope that the families can finally begin the healing process and find comfort in being able to give their loved ones a proper burial after all these years. They encountered the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand, can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature, with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Harmon and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Harmon Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Harmon completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Harmon was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients.
It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and a measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash cannon and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to the cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list.
It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head,
with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Venning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Venning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. "We will never forgive him for what he did to our family," said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. "I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers," added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and the uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out, because it wasn't his fault. Absurd.